Number 8, we said our prayers. In July 2020, a former reality TV star from Showtime's Gigolos blamed his behavior on magic mushrooms when he was accused of murder. His friend was found brutally beaten to death in his Las Vegas condo. 29-year-old Harleen Dulai was a Temple University graduate who got her bachelor's degree in biological science. She was a bit shy and reserved, but towards the end of her life, she was trying hard to break out of her shell. Dulai moved to Las Vegas in 2017 to continue her education and pursue modeling on the side to boost her own self-confidence. She met reality star Akshaya Kubiak sometime in the middle of 2020, but it's unclear which of them first reached out to the other. Kubiak had a history of going after, quote, models that seemed lost, so he was naturally drawn to Dulai. Although Kubiak often worked as a male escort himself, many believe that their relationship was genuine, and Dulai's family confirmed that the two of them had been talking daily. The man's friend said that he was a healer and that it was his purpose in life. One tragic night, Dulai was visiting Kubiak's condo when things got out of hand. A 911 call was placed by the gigolo saying that he and the woman had taken mushrooms together when she suddenly attacked him. Kubiak reportedly said, "We said our prayers," and then explained that after taking the hallucinogens that he was no longer in this reality. He said that there had been a struggle between them and she suffered a heart attack. The operators coached him on how to perform CPR until emergency responders made it to their location. But when Darren Lutz, Clark County fire captain, and his crew arrived, they were not prepared for what they saw. Dulai's lifeless body was lying on the ground with her face badly bruised and swollen. Her hair was tangled with blood, and her entire body had been covered by candle wax. Kubiak initially said the woman had attacked him, so he was forced to defend himself, but after a while he admitted, "I did this." Dulai's injuries were even more serious than they had seemed on the outside, and after an autopsy was performed, they discovered that her teeth had been broken and pieces of them were inside her stomach. Her neck was fractured, she had a broken rib, and her brain had hemorrhaged. To the investigators, this did not seem like self-defense. Dulai's cause of death was determined as blunt force trauma with strangulation as a contributing factor. The incident happened in July 2020, just a few months after the two met. Akshaya Kubiak pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and mayhem in September that same year. He blamed psychedelic mushrooms for his violent outburst, but it didn't diminish his actions or consequences. For the brutal murder of Harleen Dulai, Kubiak was sentenced to serve 20 years in prison. Number 7, LSD paranoia. In 2016, a 22-year-old student from the University of Washington was killed after her boyfriend took LSD and savagely attacked her using Taekwondo moves. It's important to remember that if you're going to take hallucinogenic drugs, you should always get them from someone you trust. But in this case, Katie Strauslin and 23-year-old Casey S. Henderson decided to buy LSD from a random person they met on the street. After buying the drugs, the two of them went back to Katie's apartment and things went downhill from there. It, quote, started to get weird for the two, and Casey began feeling extremely paranoid. In his altered mental state, he believed his girlfriend was plotting against him. He thought he was protecting himself when he started punching and kicking Katie using special moves he learned in his Taekwondo lessons. A neighbor reportedly called 911 and claimed they heard someone yelling, "I will kill you," and "You want to die?" When police arrived, they heard strange noises coming from inside, but after a few knocks, everything went dead quiet. They apparently saw Casey choking Katie through a glass door, and when he finally got to the woman, she didn't have a pulse. She was immediately taken to the hospital and put on life support since she couldn't breathe on her own, but she had no brain function. Katie later passed away from her extensive injuries at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. During Casey's trial, he pled guilty to second-degree murder and domestic violence. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 18 years and 4 months behind bars. Number 6, bad trip. In April 2020, a man from the uptown neighborhood of Chicago claimed he smothered his wife because she was experiencing a violent bad trip from magic mushrooms. Brian David Rosen was 34 years old when he murdered his wife, 25-year-old Isabel Rosen. At the time, Brian was studying phlebotomy at Columbia College and worked as a DJ on the side to make some money. Before this, the couple had been living off Isabel's income from her job at LensCrafters, but during the pandemic, she was let go. After losing her career, she started showing signs of, quote, decompensation with schizophrenic episodes. Brian and Isabel were obviously going through a hard time, and the two of them needed a change. Isabel thought that they would benefit from a little excitement, so they decided to try magic mushrooms. Most people know that if you suffer from mental illness, hallucinogenic drugs are not a good idea, but Isabel still wanted to try them. On April 28th, the couple took the mushrooms and waited for the effects to kick in. Not surprisingly, Isabel had a bad trip and started acting erratically. During her psychosis, she began yelling, and her mood shifted from violent to laughing to singing, and all within minutes. Her altered mental state caused her to be abusive towards Brian, and she reportedly slammed him into a table. Although Isabel was an obvious danger to herself and others, it didn't excuse Brian's next action, though. The woman's husband believed her loud screaming would make a neighbor, quote, think he was abusing her, so he laid her down on the couch and placed 2 pillows over her head. He then smothered Isabel until she stopped breathing. After committing the murder, Brian sent several text messages to his dead wife that explained everything she had done to him during the bad trip. In one text, he said, quote, I hope you are happy and it was worth trying this drug, end quote. And his last message simply read, I'm sorry. Brian then called 911 to report the incident shortly after Isabel was killed and turned himself in to the authorities. He was charged with first-degree murder, and Isabel's death was ruled a homicide from smothering and asphyxia by the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office. Perhaps the feelings of guilt were too much for Brian to handle because, 2 months after he was charged with his wife's murder, he tragically took his own life. Number 5. Still Beating Heart. A mixed martial artist from Northern California pleaded guilty to murder after he gruesomely killed his friend while under the influence of hallucinogenic drugs back in 2010. The 29-year-old MMA fighter named Jared Wyatt was found naked and covered in blood by police at home near the Klamath River on March 21st of that year. Inside the property, officers found 21-year-old Taylor Powell's mutilated body lying on the couch. According to court documents, his chest had been split open and his tongue, heart, and the skin from his face were all gone. Nearby, in a wood-burning stove, they found the burnt remains of Powell's heart. Wyatt reportedly confessed to the officers on the spot and said, I killed him. Shockingly, the autopsy revealed that the man's organs had been removed while Powell was still breathing. Witnesses to the horrific crime claimed the two men had ingested hallucinogenic mushrooms and believed they were in a battle between God and the devil. Wyatt started to think Powell was the devil himself and attacked him. He didn't realize the gravity of what he had done until he had sobered up from the bad trip. At the beginning of his murder trial, Wyatt pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, which prompted a psychiatrist to evaluate his mental competence. But a judge found him well enough to stand trial in May. He later agreed to a plea deal where he would serve 50 years to life behind bars for his actions. What would you do if your friend was having a bad trip and acted crazy? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 4. Psilocybin mushrooms. A 17-year-old teenager high on mushrooms reportedly ran over another teen with his car in Kansas City, Missouri back in 2017. Jacob Musto, a student from Liberty High School, killed his classmate, 17-year-old Jake Waymeyer, in the middle of a psilocybin mushroom trip. It's unclear if Jake had also taken the hallucinogenic drug or not, but the two of them allegedly got into a fight and started throwing billiard pools at one another. Jacob got so upset that he decided to leave, but in the heat of the moment, he intentionally drove through a neighbor's yard towards Jake's home. During Jake's altered mental state, he thought, quote, everything would be okay, even if he did drive into Jake's house. He hit the gas, and at the very last second, he noticed the other boy standing in his driveway, yelling at him to slow down. But it was already too late. Jacob ended up running over Jake before ramming straight into the young man's garage door. In the end, Jacob Musto was sentenced to 15 years in jail for killing his friend, Jake Waymeyer. Number 3. MDMA bombs. A 15-year-old girl from North Allerton, North Yorkshire, passed away sadly after taking 2 MDMA bombs in May of 2019. That year, Leah Hayes and a group of 30 other teenagers decided to experiment with some drugs. The young girl and one of her friends wanted to try ecstasy, so they bought a 10-pound dose of the drug. What they had purchased were described as S-bombs by Detective Sergeant Parker, who worked on the case since it was a crystal form of the drug. Leah apparently ingested one of these bombs and then, later that day, took another one. At around 9 p.m. that night, Leah's mother, Carrie Roberts, received a phone call from one of her daughter's friends. The girl had collapsed at the Applegarth car park and seemed to be extremely intoxicated. Police Constable Jack Dodsworth was the first to get to the scene. He reported that Leah was, quote, slurring her words and not making any sense. By the time her mom had been contacted, Leah had fallen to the ground again, and shortly after, she slipped out of consciousness and began having a seizure. Dodsworth said that her breathing was shallow and he could hear some kind of rattling noise. An ambulance crew was called to their location and Leah was given an adrenaline shot to restart her heart, but Sadly, she never regained consciousness and later passed away after being taken to the hospital. Number 2. Grand Theft Auto. In June 2018, a man from Oregon thought he was in a video game after getting into a high-speed car chase with police. 23-year-old Anthony Clark was under the influence of some pretty serious hallucinogenic drugs when he decided to get behind the wheel of his vehicle. Police quickly noticed his erratic driving as he sped through multiple towns, ran through a fence, and even drove down roads the wrong way. He was eventually caught by officers after accidentally driving straight into a police cruiser. He tried to leave the scene by stealing another car from a nearby mobile home park, but was apprehended before he could cause any more damage. Luckily, according to the local newspaper in Grants Pass, Oregon, nobody was hurt during this crazy incident. When questioned by the authorities, he admitted to being high and said he was hallucinating. He thought he was literally in Grand Theft Auto and didn't realize at the time that his actions were affecting the real world. Despite this, he was still charged by the Ashland Police Department with a slew of criminal charges like reckless driving and first-degree criminal mischief, to name a few. It's unclear, though, whether he was sent to prison for his crimes. Number 1. Mr. Happy. In July 2015, a 20-year-old musician was stabbed to death by one of his bandmates while high on a drug called Mr. Happy in New York. Liam Miller was attacked by his best friend, 19-year-old Samuel Donnelly, after they experimented with hallucinogenic drugs. Apparently, Mr. Happy is an LSD-type drug, and after falling under its effects, Donnelly had a bad trip. The two men had been alone together at Donnelly's house through most of that day and reportedly took too much of the hallucinogen after they didn't initially feel its effects. In the middle of Donnelly's drug-fueled psychosis, Miller contacted a friend on Facebook asking what he should do to help. The pal explained that the drug wouldn't last forever and that it, quote, would soon be over. Sadly, before Donnelly regained control, he lashed out and began stabbing Miller with a knife. Miller tried to escape from his demented friend, but only made it to the end of the driveway before passing away. A neighbor who heard the commotion outside and witnessed the heinous act called the police. When emergency services arrived, Donnelly was taken into custody after a short but violent confrontation with the officers. When questioned by authorities about the incident, he claimed, quote, that he believed he was in a dream and the only way to get back to the real world was to stab his best friend. Donnelly was ultimately charged with manslaughter, and because he had stabbed Miller 32 times, he was sentenced to 6 years and 8 months in prison. Have you ever had a bad trip? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Bad Badger.